Okay, so what we're going to do is have a little bit of a more, how can I put it, structured delve into the shader room and shader nodes and so on. But before we really get into that, I want to create a scene which I can use over and over again to reproduce the same lighting conditions and so on. So first thing I'm going to do is just remove this light. Let's delete that. There we go. And then let's go over to the rendered view. I'm on cycles. No, I'm not. I'm on EV because I reset to factory. So let's change that to cycles, and now we can start adding some lights in. So most of our sort of preview work is going to be done from this rendered camera view. So we want the light to match up with that essentially. There we go. So first thing we'll do is create a light. Let's turn that off. So add light, and we want an area light. And if I press G and Z, I can move that up. You can see that light comes in. I've slipped into orthographic there. So we have a light. It's a little bit small, so we'll scale that up. So it's S, and then we'll move out. And what value have I got on that? About 4. That should do. I'm just going to take the decimals out because I'm a bit like that. And it's a little bit dim. So in the properties, we'll go to the light tab, the little green bulb down there, and let's increase that to say 500 for the moment. That might be a bit much. But we're going to move it away, so it's not too much of a problem. Okay, so with the light selected, we're going to move it towards the camera. So if I grab this and whoops, that's scale. Let's come out of that mode first. There we go. I'm going to grab it, and then I'm going to rotate it towards the cube. So R, and just rotate that around. It's a little bit rotated oddly, but never mind. No, I'm going to undo it. So let's do it on R and Y, I think it will be. R, Y, no, it's R, X. There we go. And then I'm going to move that towards the camera, and then R, and this time it will be Z. There we go. So I'm just going to move it up so that the kind of beam point is more or less intersecting with the center point there, the 3D cursor. And then I'm going to change my center point to the 3D cursor, because now I can adjust it very easily. If I press R, it's always going to point at that 3D cursor, because that's the point I'm rotating around. So we can move that around as we want. Okay, so let's go to the 3D cam. Now I want to see I've got pretty good light sort of either way there, and you know, not much on top, so perhaps I'll move that up. So let's turn that down, take that camera out rather, and now when I rotate it, I want to rotate it upwards. I want to go back to the 3D, the rendered projection. I've got good light all the way up and around that. Okay, so that's our first light, and what I want to do now is duplicate this and then rotate it around a little bit to give me a fill light. It's not especially obvious on a cube, so I'm going to delete that cube and add in a sphere. So it's add UV sphere. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit and right click and smooth shaded. There we go. And now if I look at the camera view, you see I've got kind of a halo around it, a halo of dark, and I want to try and eliminate that as much as I can. So first of all, I'm going to move my light down so it takes this bottom area out, Let's go back to the proper view and hit rotate again. This time I'm going to rotate it down, and then I'll have a look at there, and there we go, that's got rid of some of that. And now I need to do the same for this kind of at the side and the back. So we'll duplicate that light with Shift and D. Oops, sorry. Let me undo that. So what I want to do is immediately I do Shift and D. If I can press the right key, there we go, to right click and then rotate. So now I'm going to rotate it around and R again to get to a side view. So I'm not doing a very good job here. I'll keep moving it off that plane. There we go. So now when I go in, I should have light all around both sides. But I don't need quite this much light on this area. So I'm going to take that down to say 250. And that will kind of even it up. So it's not too bright on one side. It's not brighter on one side than it is on another. Okay, one last light then. Let's go back to our normal view. I'm going to pick my fill light, that one, and duplicate it. So Shift and D, and right click, and I'm going to get to a top view this time, because that's what I should have done last time, and rotate that around. There we go. And now I've got a sphere lit from all sides, and I might refine it as I go, but that should do pretty nicely, I think. So let's have a look in. If I rotate that a little bit more, yeah. Actually, if I R and Z, there we go, that's more like it. I'll bring that round, and yep, it's good. I like it. Okay, so we've got a scene, and it's almost there. We might refine it as we go, as I said, but we can reproduce these lighting conditions now, but we just have to remember, you know, to save it. So I'm going to save this. I'll go File, Save As, and then in whichever directory you want, let me go backwards. There we go. I'll create a new directory, and I'll put in shaders. There we go, and shader base, and save. There we go. Right, so in the next one, what we'll do is start to look at setting up some actual nodes and textures to, you know, to get us going. So I'll talk to you then. Okay, so now we've got our scene, we can actually start to look at the shaders. So I'm just going to split my window. So I'm going to point to the top left or top right corner and left click and drag down, and that's going to split my window and give me two to work with. And now in the top window, I'm going to select my editor type and take it to shader editor. And then if I click on the sphere, if nothing comes up, go to your material properties and create new, and you call it whatever you want if you rename it at all. And now we have our shader ready and raring to go. So what we have over here is the kind of principled BSDF shader. This is not the only shader option there is, but it's the one, you know, most commonly used. And then we have the output. The output will either go to surface or volume, or there is an option for displacement. In this case we're going to go surface because we want to manipulate the surface of our sphere. If we went to volume, volume is used for things such as fire effects and smoke and so on and so forth. Okay, so with those two just popped out the way there, we need a couple of other things. So we need a way of telling the shader how to map our texture onto the model, and for that we need a texture coordinates. So if you press Shift A and under input, I believe it is, we go to texture coordinates and just drop that into the viewport, we've got texture coordinates, and it's got lots of outputs, and depending upon which of these outputs we use will depend upon how our texture, whether it be an image or a generated generated pattern, it will map differently. Between generated and normal in UV and object, they will all behave slightly differently. If you don't have a UV'd object, then using one of the other options is a great idea. But quite often, if you're using a shader, using the UV is not always the best idea. Anyway, so we're going to have that, and now I'm going to move that right over, because in the middle of all that is going to be our pattern generation. It's how we're going to build a texture to put onto our sphere, and we'll just do a very simple one to start with. So Shift A, and then we'll go to texture, and we can select any one of our texture things here which will generate a pattern for us, and I'm going to pick the noise texture and then just pop that in. Now we have two outputs from here. We have the FAC and we have the color. The FAC is basically grayscale, a grayscale version of what your noise texture is, and the color will be the color version. And if I take this color and plug it into the color over here, and then go over to my rendered view, you'll see it's mapping onto our surface. And that's because even though we haven't plugged the texture coordinate in, I believe the default texture coordinate is generated. So if I plug generated into the vector, it shouldn't change. But if I use object, for example, instead, it will change. If I used UV, it would change. Really depending upon how you want your texture to be generated and mapped will depend upon which of these outputs you use. And for this one, because it's non-seam like, it doesn't worry about seams too much, I'm going to use the object channel. Okay, so that is the basics of it. At this size we have our coordinates, how we're going to map. In between this space we're going to have our how to generate the pattern using a number of different nodes, and then how it's outputted to the model itself through the shader, and then through the material object node there, or output node, sorry, it's my eyes. Okay, so in the next one we'll start to look at some other functions and some other sort of aspects of the principal node to see what different effects we can do there. I basically work in a PBR kind of workflow, which I think most people do now, which is physically based rendered materials, and there's a couple of different kind of inputs on the BDSF shader node that we can use for that. So we'll go through that in a moment. Okay, so let's have a look at the other PBR options we've got. So I have a noise texture going into my color, but the other pieces we want to have a look at is metallic and roughness. So metallic and roughness basically define surface properties. If metallic is set to 1, then the whole the whole surface is considered material, a metal, a dielectric I think it is, and if it's turned to 0, then it's not a metal. It's relatively simple in that respect, except you can plug a grayscale in to sort of change it across the model, so not all of it is in one place. Commonly used when you're doing like a rust texture over the top of a metal. And then roughness is how rough the surface is. So if the metallic is at 1, it's very, very shiny. But then again, we all know that not all metal is shiny polished chrome. So roughness gives you a chance to increase and decrease how rough the surface is. Whether you're going from a very polished, aluminium, which is very shiny, to a more machined aluminium, which would be a little duller, but still a metal. Okay, so for these two, we can just change the values. So I can change that to 1, and now we can see that our little multicolored sphere down here has turned quite shiny. And if I take the roughness down to 0, it's virtually a mirror. We can see our lights all set up and reflected in that. And if I take metallic down to 0 and roughness down to 0, it's a bit more like a pool ball, except a multicolored pool ball, obviously. If I turn metallic to 1 and roughness to 1, we get a very rough metal. Still a metal, but very rough. And typically you go somewhere in between, unless you're doing, really, really kind of polished jewellery or something. Okay, so we don't need to plug values into this. We can use our noise texture in this case to drive those values. So if I take the FAC, which is the grayscale output, and pop that into my metallic, it will change it. We will be able to see that in some places it's much shinier and in other places it's duller, depending upon the grayscale value. And if you want to see the grayscale value, it's relatively straightforward. Just make sure you have Node Wrangler enabled, which is under Edit and Preferences, and under Add-ins just type in Node in our little search there, and then we can enable the Node Wrangler. There we go. So with Node Wrangler enabled, we can press Shift Control and click on the noise texture, and it will pop this little viewer in and show us the output in the viewport. So where it's white, it's going to be either really shiny or really dark, and where it's black, it's either really shiny or really dark. So sorry to be vague on that. I get them mixed up because it's different in some programs than it is to others. But I'm transitioning, I always get it wrong. My general understanding is black is 0, 1 is white. So in this case, if it's all white, it's all metallic. If it's all 0, it's all. If it's all black, it's 0. Therefore, it's non-metallic. Okay, so that's lovely, and we can also plug that into our roughness channel. And then if I click back on this principled and press Shift Control and click, now we'll see what it looks like in the viewport. There we go. Let me switch to the render camera and zoom in a bit. And there we have it. Okay, so that's one part of it. The next part is actually controlling the output from a node to the surface. We can put some nodes between here, which will either increase or decrease, or will process that black and white image in some way. So I will talk to you in the next video. Okay, so I'm just going to unplug all of these just to show you a bit of a better demonstration of what it's doing. And I'm going to change the base colour to say a dark grey. So without this noise, this is what the texture looks like. And I'm not going to use the colour this time. I'm just going to use FAC and plug that into metallic. And you can see that that metallic map then is driving our metal value, and the shader looks different. And if I also take that and put it into roughness, then again we get a different kind of value. So, you know, this noise is all very well, and we can change it, we can update it, we can do all sorts of things. We can change the scale, for example, up and down. Up is finer, if you like. We can change the amount of detail in it, and we can change the roughness in it to, you know, get just the effect you want. But what I want to do is actually change the strength of the output, and we'll do that with a color ramp. So if I press Shift A, and then under Converter, you'll find the color ramp node, and if I drop that on that line there, you'll see that color ramp node plugs itself in between the FAC output and the roughness input. And if I click on the color ramp itself, because I want to see the output as I'm going, and Shift, Control and click, it will show me the results of this color ramp. So with the color ramp, what I could do is take this black value and push it upwards, and then essentially I get more black out of the scene. You know, I'm starting to reduce the amount of areas of grey and white to, you know, a minimal level, and that's going to sharpen up my my map. And if I Shift Control click on there, you'll see now that I'm getting a much shinier effect on the material. And if I take that back, you'll see it's all dulling out. And if I take the white and I move it to the middle, you'll see we have kind of the opposite effect. It's really dulling everything down even further. So you can use a color ramp to control your values here. So if I move that up, I will get a shinier areas, and if I move this one down, it will dull them back out again. It will increase the amount of white. White being 1 is the maximum value, therefore it's the roughest value. So generally speaking, you don't really want, you know, completely black or completely white maps. You want somewhere in the middle. It changes from time to time, but you know, it's a general rule of thumb. We also have up here some options. We can go to an ease mix that changes the way it interpolates. We can go linear and B-spline and all sorts of different, you know, mix methods to, you know, give us different effects. So I'm going to leave that one on linear, I think, the default. The other thing we can do is I can remove all completely black values from this by just clicking on this little marker here and then changing this to a darker grey but not black. Yeah, and similarly I can take all white values out by simply taking this to a light grey. So I'm excluding the sort of upper and lower ranges of the whole thing. We can also add an intermediate value by clicking plus, and I can select that value and take that to whatever value I want. So it's suggesting kind of nearly mid. I'm going to change it to below mid, and then I get this much shinier but still diffuse on the edges texture. Okay, so I hope that made sense. Let me go to Control Shift plus, and that's what my map looks like. And you know, anytime you can adjust this and it will adjust, yeah, on the fly. If I took this output and popped it into metallic, it will drive both. And if I Shift Control plus on the BDSF, you know, it will, you know, it will preview and show us what we want. So that's just a little bit about controlling output from noises, or not just noises, but from any texture node to manipulate your maps. So in the next one, we're going to have a look at the bump channels, normals, so height data, and we'll have a look how to convert a black and white map into a bump. So I'll talk to you then. Okay, so we can take height data or black and white data and turn it into height data, and for that we need to plug something into the normal on the BDSF principled shader node here, and you'll notice that that's a little purple input, whereas the inputs we've got currently are either black and white or colour, so grey or yellow there. So what we can do to convert from black and white to height data is add a bump node. So Shift A and then vector and bump, and if I drop that in there, you'll see we have a few inputs in terms of strength and distance, height and normal, and we don't need to plug into all of these, but we can take our noise data there from the black and white channel, the grey channel, and pop it into the height, and that will convert the height into some normal data. So it will convert it through this node and output it from this purple exit point here, and I can plug that into the normal, and now I've got height data, which I hope you can see on my model there. You see it's got lots and lots of surface information in it, and it's faceting my piece here. That is most likely because my strength is too high. So I'll take that down to 0.2, and now you can start seeing that. Perhaps even 0.1. There we go. Now we've got some very fine bumps on there. If I shift click on the bump node, you'll see what it looks like. It doesn't look like a traditional kind of blue normal map. You'll see it's a different kind of normal map, but you can see that there's detail on there. And of course I could take the color from there and pop that in there, and that will give me a different or slightly different pattern because we've processed it through this color ramp. There we go. And let's shift control click on the principled BDSF node, and that's what we got. Okay, so what else can we do here? Well, we can invert the information, basically flip the black and white channels. We can adjust, of course, our height value to get down to a level that you're happy with. Distance we can up and down. Not entirely sure about that one, to be perfectly honest. But we can also daisy chain these together. So if I had another set of shaders down here, or set of nodes, which resulted in a bump node, I could plug the two bump nodes together and they would add together and add into the normal channel. Okay, so we've gone through the very basics of how a node or a collection of nodes is set up. We've gone through the color, the roughness and the metallic, adding in a texture node to give us a black and white texture to work with, and then processing that through a color ramp. And largely speaking, that is the basics. There's a lot of other things to do, and we'll do that in perhaps the next sort of texture one I do, where we'll just build on those skills and introduce a few other nodes to add some real detail to this. Okay, so I hope you found that useful, and I will talk to you in another video.